Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. November always makes me think about that Thanksgiving when I drove up to my parents' place in Connecticut, radio playing oldies while autumn leaves swirled across the highway. I'd just gotten promoted at the publishing house where I worked, and for once I felt like I had good news to share at the family table. Mom had called 3 times that week to confirm I was coming, reminding me to bring my famous cornbread stuffing that everyone pretended to love. Dad was probably already stationed in his recliner, watching football with the volume too high, sneaking bites of whatever Mom had cooling on the counter. My sister Natalie would be there with her husband Tom and their twin boys, plus my brother Jason was flying in from Seattle with his girlfriend. Even cousin Beth promised to show up, though she had a habit of arriving fashionably late to everything since college. Our parents lived in one of those neighborhoods where every house had the same mailbox, and people actually cared about their lawn height, 40 minutes outside Hartford, in a town small enough that the grocery store clerk knew your birthday. Mom had been cooking since Tuesday, the kitchen windows fogged up from steam, her apron covered in flour and mysterious stains that she wore like battle scars. When I pulled into the driveway around 3 that afternoon, I could already smell the turkey through my car vents, that rich golden scent mixing with cinnamon and nutmeg from whatever pies were cooling inside. Natalie's minivan was parked crooked as always, and Jason's rental car sat beside it, still sporting an airport parking stub on the dash. Inside, the house buzzed with that special kind of chaos that only happens when family converges. Voices layered over each other, kids shrieking with joy, football announcers droning from the living room, and Mom orchestrating everything from her command post by the stove. Dinner was supposed to start at 5, but we all knew that meant 5:30 in Mom time, after she'd checked the turkey's temperature 4 more times and rearranged the table settings that were already perfect. Beth finally showed up around 4:30, breezing through the door with apologies about traffic and a store-bought pie that Mom would politely put on the dessert table next to her homemade ones. We were all catching up in the living room, Jason telling some story about turbulence on his flight, while Tom tried to keep the twins from destroying Mom's coffee table arrangement of ceramic pilgrim figurines she'd had since the 80s. Dad had dozed off in his chair, mouth slightly open, the remote balanced on his stomach, rising and falling with each breath. Everything felt exactly like it should, like every other year, comfortable and predictable in the best way possible. Around 5:15, just as Mom was calling everyone to help carry dishes to the dining room, the doorbell rang. We all kind of looked at each other because everyone was already here, and Mom hadn't mentioned inviting anyone else. Beth jumped up from the couch, saying something about how she forgot to mention she'd invited someone, her voice carrying that nervous pitch it got when she was covering for something. She hurried to the door before anyone could ask questions, and we heard her greeting someone warmly, though her laugh sounded forced, brittle around the edges. A moment later, she walked back in with this man, probably mid-30s, wearing a charcoal sweater over a white button-down, dark jeans, everything pressed and neat like he'd just stepped out of a catalog. He had one of those faces that was handsome in a forgettable way. Brown hair trimmed short, clean-shaven. The kind of guy you'd pass on the street and never think about again. Beth introduced him as Kyle, and Mom, being Mom, immediately went into hostess mode, welcoming him and insisting he join us for dinner, saying there was plenty of food, which was true since she always cooked for an army. He shook hands with everyone, his grip firm but not trying to prove anything, smiled at the kids without that fake enthusiasm some adults put on, and complimented the house in this quiet, measured way. His voice had this particular quality, not quite monotone but close, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized. Jason offered him a beer, which he politely declined, asking for water instead. Natalie was already setting another place at the table, and Tom was making small talk about the weather and asking how he knew Beth. Kyle's answers were perfectly normal but weirdly vague, saying they'd met through mutual friends, keeping everything surface level without seeming evasive. We all settled around the dining room table. Mom's good china gleaming under the chandelier she only turned on for special occasions. The turkey golden and magnificent as a centerpiece surrounded by every side dish known to mankind. Dad carved while we passed around mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce that still showed the ridges from the can just how Dad liked it, and my stuffing that everyone took small portions of to be polite. Kyle sat between Beth and Jason, cutting his food into precise, identical pieces before eating, each bite deliberate and careful. He answered questions when asked, but never initiated conversation, and I noticed he kept glancing at the windows, quick little checks like he was timing something. The twins were getting restless, kicking table legs and whining about wanting pie already, while Natalie tried to bribe them with promises of extra whipped cream if they'd just eat 3 more bites of vegetables. That's when I saw it. Just a dark stain on his sleeve when he reached for the salt, spreading from under his cuff maybe 3 inches up his forearm. At first I thought maybe it was sauce or wine, but the color was wrong, too dark, almost black against the gray fabric, and it had that stiff quality fabric gets when something has dried into it. Without really thinking, I asked him what happened to his sweater, pointing at the stain, and the entire table went quiet in that abrupt way that makes your ears ring. Kyle looked down at his sleeve slowly, like he'd forgotten it was there, then pulled his arm back under the table. Beth started to say something about how clumsy he was, always spilling things, but her voice cracked and died halfway through the excuse. Mom was staring at the spot where his arm had been, her fork suspended between her plate and her mouth, gravy dripping onto the tablecloth she'd ironed that morning. Kyle stood up then, not quickly but with this terrible purposefulness, pushing his chair back with both hands, and I remember thinking how his fingernails were too clean, like he'd scrubbed them raw. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out something black and heavy-looking, and for a second my brain refused to process what I was seeing, because things like that didn't belong at Mom's Thanksgiving table next to the ceramic turkey salt shakers she'd owned since before I was born. Dad started to stand too, his napkin falling to the floor, saying something about calming down. "Let's talk about this." But Kyle pointed the gun at him without even looking, like it was an afterthought, and Dad sat back down hard enough to make the dishes jump. One of the twins started crying, that hitching, confused sob kids do when they don't understand why the adults are acting wrong, and Tom tried to pull both boys closer, but Kyle made this clicking sound with his tongue, just once, and Tom's hand stopped moving. He walked over to the dining room entrance, still holding the gun loose and comfortable like it weighed nothing, and turned the deadbolt with his free hand, the sound impossibly loud in the silence broken only by the child's whimpering and the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Then he moved to the windows, pulling the curtains closed one by one, taking his time like he had all night, and with each swoosh of fabric the room got smaller and darker despite the chandelier blazing overhead. When he turned back to us, his face had changed somehow, not the features but the way he wore them, like he'd finally stopped pretending to be human and let whatever was underneath show through. He told us to put our phones on the table, voice still calm and measured, and we did, our hands moving like we were underwater. Mom's case with the painted roses, Dad's ancient flip phone, everyone's devices making a little pile next to the boat of gravy that was still steaming. Beth was shaking so hard her chair creaked, tears running down her face and dripping onto her plate, mixing with the cranberry sauce into something that looked like diluted blood. Kyle noticed and walked behind her chair, placing his free hand on her shoulder, and she went completely rigid, like a rabbit when a hawk passes overhead. He said he hadn't expected everyone to be here, that this was supposed to be simpler, but that plans change and we adapt, all while his thumb moved in small circles on Beth's shoulder like he was comforting her. Jason carefully, slowly, asked what he wanted. Money, cars, whatever it was, we could figure it out. But Kyle just tilted his head like Jason had asked something in a foreign language. He said he'd been watching Beth for weeks, learning her schedule, her habits, waiting for the right moment. And Thanksgiving had seemed perfect because she'd be distracted, happy, guard down. Except she'd invited him inside herself, thinking he was someone from her yoga class who'd been flirting with her. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. Kyle making us sit there while he ate his pie, gun resting next to his plate like another piece of silverware, occasionally picking it up to gesture when someone shifted too much or breathed too loud. He told us about following Beth home from the grocery store, sitting outside her apartment, how easy it was to duplicate her parking pass, slip into her building's gym when she worked out at the same time every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Mom tried to keep the twins calm, singing quietly under her breath, old lullabies from when we were little, while Dad's jaw worked like he was chewing words he couldn't say. At some point, Tom's youngest threw up, fear and turkey mixing into something awful, and Kyle made Natalie clean it with Mom's good napkins while the rest of us watched. Nobody allowed to help or move or even look away. He went through our phones then, reading text messages out loud, showing us pictures from our own cameras, asking questions about people in the photos like we were having a normal conversation, like the gun wasn't right there, like Beth wasn't making these tiny wounded animal sounds every time he touched her hair. Around 8:30, Jason's girlfriend started moving her foot just slightly toward her purse on the floor, where I knew she kept pepper spray on her keychain because she'd shown it to me earlier, proud of the pink canister she'd bought after moving to the city. Kyle noticed immediately, of course he did, and very calmly shot the purse, the sound so loud in the dining room that my ears rang for 20 minutes after, the twins screaming, Mom pulling them against her even though Kyle had said not to move. The bullet went through the purse and into Mom's hardwood floor, leaving a hole that would never really get fixed, just covered with a rug that nobody would ever explain. He said the next one wouldn't be aimed at the floor, said it just like he was passing the butter, and Jason's girlfriend wet herself, the shame and terror on her face something I still see sometimes when I can't sleep. We sat there for another hour after that, nobody trying anything, until police sirens started getting closer, and Kyle stood up like he'd been waiting for them, walking to the back door that led to Mom's garden, telling us to count to 100 before moving. Nice and slow, out loud, together, and we did, our voices shaking through numbers while we heard his footsteps on the deck. Then nothing. The police found us still sitting at the table when they broke through the front door, Beth in complete shock, unable to speak for 3 days afterward. The rest of us trying to explain what happened while EMTs checked everyone, even though nobody was physically hurt except for bruises on Beth's shoulder, shaped like fingertips. Turns out Kyle wasn't even his real name, and the man they eventually caught 3 states over had been doing this for years, choosing women who lived alone, sometimes just watching them for months, sometimes breaking in. But we were the first family situation he'd attempted. The detective said we were lucky, that it could have gone much worse. But lucky isn't the word I'd use for what happened to us. Beth moved back home with our parents for 6 months. Couldn't be alone. Jumped whenever someone knocked on a door, and even now, years later, she won't go to yoga anymore. Won't go anywhere she might run into strangers who seem too friendly, too interested in her schedule. We still do Thanksgiving at Mom and Dad's house because Mom refused to let him take that from us. But it's different now, smaller, quieter, everyone arriving together, leaving together, no strangers, no plus ones unless we've known them for years. And Dad installed 3 new deadbolts and a security system that he checks obsessively. The hole in the dining room floor is covered by a Persian rug Mom bought at an estate sale, and we all step around it carefully, like it might still be dangerous, like stepping on it might somehow bring him back. Sometimes during dinner, I'll catch one of us staring at the chair where he sat, now pushed into the corner and used only to hold coats, and we'll make eye contact and look away quickly, the memory passing between us like a static shock. The twins don't remember much, which is a blessing, but Natalie says they still sometimes ask why everyone got so quiet that night, why Aunt Beth was so sad, why we had to count to 100, and she tells them it was just a game, just a silly adult game that went too long. And they believe her because they were young enough that their minds protected them from the worst of it, rewrote the story into something softer, safer, something that couldn't follow them into their dreams. My therapist had been pushing me for months to reach out to my siblings, but sending those Thanksgiving invitation emails felt like swallowing broken glass. 5 years we'd gone without speaking, all because of some stupid fight over Dad's estate that spiraled into something uglier than any of us intended. Carolyn and Bradley had been my best friends once, before lawyers and appraisals and old resentments turned us into strangers. Sitting in my kitchen that October afternoon, I stared at my laptop screen for 20 minutes before finally hitting send on both messages. 2 days later, when Carolyn replied with a simple, "We'll be there," followed by Bradley's "Count me in," I had to lock myself in the bathroom at work to pull myself together. 37 years on this planet, and I was crying in a bathroom stall over a 2-word email. By Wednesday night before Thanksgiving, my dining room looked like a food magazine threw up in it. I'd spent nearly $300 at Whole Foods, another $100 at Trader Joe's, and even drove 40 minutes to this specialty shop in Westchester for some fancy butter from France that supposedly made everything taste better. Every single item still sealed in its original packaging, laid out on my counter like evidence in a crime scene. The 22-pound turkey from that organic farm upstate, the pre-made sides with their tamper-proof seals, even the pies came in those rigid plastic containers you need scissors to open. Carolyn was bringing her husband Mark and their daughter Ashley, who I hadn't seen since she was 9 and missing her front teeth. Bradley would come alone, his divorce papers barely 2 months old, probably dreading the questions everyone would carefully not ask. Thanksgiving morning arrived with one of those crisp blue skies that made you grateful to be alive, and I was up at 6, too anxious to sleep any longer. The turkey went into the oven first, still in its original packaging until the very last second when I transferred it to the roasting pan. I actually took a photo of the sealed package before opening it, some paranoid part of me wanting proof that everything started out fine. The kitchen filled with that gorgeous smell of roasting bird and herbs, and for a few hours, I let myself believe this would work. I kept checking my phone, waiting for last-minute cancellations, but the family group chat stayed quiet, except for Carolyn sending a thumbs-up emoji when I texted that dinner would be at 4 sharp. They arrived within minutes of each other, which felt staged somehow, like they'd coordinated in the driveway to avoid any awkward one-on-one time. Ashley had grown into this stunning young woman with her mother's cheekbones and her father's quiet confidence, giving me a genuine hug that nearly broke me all over again. Bradley looked thinner, worn down in that specific way divorce carves into people, but he brought flowers, yellow roses like Mom used to grow. We all danced around the elephant in the room with remarkable skill, talking about traffic and weather, and Ashley's college applications, while I ferried dishes from kitchen to dining room. Mark helped carve the turkey, making some joke about his surgical precision from years of fishing, and for about 30 beautiful minutes, we felt like a family again. We were halfway through the meal when Carolyn's fork clattered onto her plate. She pressed her hand against her chest, her face draining of color so fast it looked like someone was adjusting the contrast on a TV screen. Mark was asking if she was okay when she pitched forward, her face nearly landing in the mashed potatoes before he caught her shoulders. Ashley screamed, that sharp teenage pitch that cuts through everything, and I was already reaching for my phone when Bradley made this horrible gasping sound. He stood up, knocking his chair backward, clutching at his throat like something was stuck, but nothing was there. His eyes locked on mine for one terrible second, confused and terrified, before his knees buckled and he went down hard, taking half the tablecloth with him. Everything after that moved in weird, jerky segments, like a movie with missing frames. Mark on the floor doing CPR compressions on Carolyn, while Ashley counted out loud between sobs. Me trying to explain to the 911 operator that 2 people had collapsed at dinner. No known allergies. Yes, they're both breathing, but barely. The turkey sitting there on its silver platter, looking obscene and wrong while my brother writhed on my dining room floor. I remember noticing the stupidest details, like how Bradley's wine had spilled in a perfect arc across my grandmother's white tablecloth, like how one of the candles kept flickering even though nobody was moving near it. The paramedics arrived in 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours, and suddenly my house was full of strangers in uniforms, radios crackling, medical terms I didn't understand bouncing off the walls. At the hospital, they separated us immediately. Carolyn and Bradley went straight to the ICU, while the rest of us got shuffled into different exam rooms for blood tests and questioning. A doctor with exhausted eyes and day-old stubble explained that both my siblings showed signs of acute poisoning, something called tetrodotoxin, which made no sense because that comes from pufferfish, and we definitely hadn't eaten any exotic seafood. The police showed up while nurses were drawing my blood for the third time, 2 detectives who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on Thanksgiving night. They bagged up my phone after I showed them the photo of the sealed turkey package, asked me to write down every single thing we'd eaten, where I'd bought it, who had access to my house. Mark kept Ashley pressed against his side while she shook, both of them testing negative for any toxins just like me. The detective, a woman named Ramirez with silver streaking through her black hair, drove me back to my house around midnight to collect the food evidence. My dining room looked like a scene from those true crime shows Ashley was always watching. Abandoned plates with half-eaten food, Bradley's chair still tipped over, that wine stain already setting into the fabric. We went through my kitchen with gloves on, bagging up every leftover, every package from the trash, even the empty containers I'd already rinsed. Ramirez found the turkey packaging in my recycling bin, held it up to the light from her phone, and that's when we both saw it, a tiny hole near the bottom corner, so small you'd never notice unless you were looking. She sealed it in an evidence bag, her face carefully neutral, but I saw her jaw tighten. Someone had injected poison through the packaging, which meant someone had been in the store, targeting that specific turkey, knowing I would buy it. They kept me at the station until 4 in the morning, going over the same questions until my voice went hoarse. Who knew about the dinner? Who knew where I shopped? Had I noticed anyone following me lately? Did my siblings have enemies? Did I have enemies? The fluorescent lights made everything feel unreal, like I was floating above myself watching some other woman in a food-stained blouse trying to explain that no, she couldn't think of anyone who'd want to hurt her family. Ramirez had store security footage pulled from the Whole Foods, 3 days of recordings to comb through, looking for someone tampering with the turkey section. They asked about my ex-husband, but David lived in Oregon now with his new family and hadn't contacted me in years. They asked about work conflicts, but I processed insurance claims for a living, boring stuff that never involved anything worth killing over. I stayed at a hotel that night because I couldn't face going home to that dining room battlefield. Didn't sleep, just sat in the uncomfortable chair by the window watching occasional cars pass on the empty street below, checking my phone every few minutes for updates from the hospital. Carolyn was stable, but still unconscious, machines breathing for her. Bradley had come around briefly, couldn't speak yet but squeezed the nurse's hand when asked if he could hear her. The hotel room smelled like old cigarette smoke painted over with industrial air freshener, and I kept replaying the dinner in my head, looking for signs I'd missed. Had anyone been watching the house when they arrived? Was there something strange about how quickly everyone got sick? Why only Carolyn and Bradley when we all ate the same food? Around 6 in the morning, I gave up pretending to rest and drove to the hospital, where Mark was sleeping across 3 waiting room chairs with Ashley curled against him like she was 5 years old again. Ramirez called while I was getting terrible coffee from the hospital vending machine, her voice tight with something I couldn't identify. She needed me to come back to my house immediately. Wouldn't say why over the phone, just that there had been a development. The drive felt endless even though it was only 15 minutes, my brain spinning through possibilities, none of them good. When I pulled up, there were 2 more police cars in my driveway, and a uniformed officer was stringing yellow tape across my porch steps. Ramirez met me on the sidewalk, holding an evidence bag with something white inside, and her first words made my knees wobble. They'd found a note, she said, tucked under my doormat where it must have been placed sometime during the night, while I was at the hotel. Computer printed on plain paper, just one line that made everything infinitely worse. You should have never invited them. The investigation exploded after that, federal agents joining because of the tetrodotoxin, which apparently flagged some database as a potential bioweapon. They interviewed everyone from my past, pulled apart 5 years of grievances and hurt feelings, looking for someone angry enough about our reconciliation to do this. The security footage showed a figure in a baseball cap and medical mask near the turkey section 3 different times, but never a clear face, like they knew exactly where the cameras were. Both my siblings survived, though Carolyn has permanent nerve damage in her left hand, and Bradley still gets seizures that the doctors say might never stop. We never found out who did it, though Ramirez had a theory she shared with me months later, off the record, about someone who'd benefited from our family staying broken, someone who'd inserted themselves into our lives during those 5 years apart. She wouldn't give me a name, said she couldn't prove it, but the way she looked at me when she said it made me think of Mark's cousin Glenn, who'd been handling Bradley's divorce, who'd been so insistent that family reunions never went well, who'd mysteriously left town the day after Thanksgiving for a job opportunity in Vancouver that nobody had heard about before. The strangest part came 6 months later, when I was finally cleaning out that dining room properly, pulling up the ruined carpet where the wine had soaked through. Underneath, wedged between 2 floorboards, I found a USB drive that definitely hadn't been there when we renovated 3 years earlier. My whole body went cold when I plugged it in and found a single video file, time-stamped from the morning of Thanksgiving. It showed my kitchen, filmed from an angle that meant someone had been inside my house, had installed a camera somewhere I never found. In the video, you could see me preparing everything, but more importantly, you could see someone else, someone in dark clothes and a ski mask entering through my back door with a key I didn't know existed. They went straight to my refrigerator, knew exactly which turkey was mine, and spent less than 30 seconds injecting something through the packaging before leaving. The figure's height, build, the way they moved, it was definitely a woman, and she had a distinctive scar on her right hand that looked fresh, maybe 6 months old. I gave the USB to Ramirez immediately, and within hours, they'd arrested Glenn's girlfriend, a woman named Veronica who'd been a lab technician at a pharmaceutical company until she got fired the previous year for stealing controlled substances. Turns out Glenn had been skimming money from Bradley's divorce settlement, nearly $40,000, and when he heard about our Thanksgiving reunion, he panicked that we'd compare notes and figure it out. Veronica confessed to everything in exchange for a plea deal, 25 years instead of life. She'd been promised half the money Glenn had stolen, thought she was just going to make everyone sick enough to ruin the dinner, claimed she didn't know the dose would be nearly fatal. Glenn got 40 years, no parole. The prosecutors said he'd been planning it since October, the moment I'd sent those invitation emails. He'd installed that camera during a friendly visit to check on me, copied my spare key, tracked my shopping patterns through my credit card statements he could access through the divorce proceedings. The USB drive was Veronica's insurance policy, hidden in my house in case Glenn tried to pin everything on her. These days, Carolyn and Bradley and I have dinner together every Sunday, no exceptions. Always at restaurants where we can see the kitchen, always ordering different dishes, never sharing food. We don't talk about that Thanksgiving anymore, but we also don't let each other out of sight for very long. And honestly, that's the only good thing that came from almost losing everything. We remembered that staying angry is a luxury you can only afford when you're certain you'll have another chance to make things right. Mom called me 3 times that week, reminding me about Thanksgiving dinner like I might somehow forget, after 36 years of showing up at the same split-level house in Michigan. Since the divorce papers were finalized in September, she'd been extra persistent about family gatherings, probably worried I'd spend the holiday eating Chinese takeout in my studio apartment. Dad had retired from the auto plant earlier that year, and according to Mom, he'd been drinking his way through retirement, tinkering in his workshop on projects nobody asked for, mostly birdhouses that cluttered the garage shelves. Uncle Frank would be there, of course, Dad's younger brother who owned a plumbing company 2 towns over, and never missed a chance to drink Dad's beer while complaining about millennials ruining the trades. Pulling into the driveway that afternoon, I noticed the Lions flag on the porch had faded to almost pink, and through the kitchen window, steam from Mom's cooking fogged the glass, same as every year since I could remember. Dad answered the door holding a Coors Light, his third or fourth judging by how he gripped the door frame for balance, and Uncle Frank's laugh boomed from the living room where the parade flickered on TV. My sister Amanda had already claimed the kitchen with Mom, her husband Steve chasing their twin boys around the coffee table while they shrieked and threw couch pillows at each other. Amanda shot me a look that said she'd been dealing with this chaos all morning, stirring gravy while Mom basted the turkey for the 100th time, both of them moving around each other with practiced efficiency. The house smelled exactly like childhood, sage and butter, and that specific brand of coffee Mom only bought for holidays, and I grabbed a beer from the fridge, settling into the worn spot on the couch while Dad and Frank argued about whether Detroit would make the playoffs. Steve finally corralled the twins with promises of pie later, and we all migrated to the dining room table, where Mom had set out the good china she inherited from Grandma, the plates with tiny painted roses around the edges. Halfway through dinner, right when Steve was telling some story about a client who tried to pay him in cryptocurrency, Dad pushed back from the table and mumbled something about needing more beer from the garage. Uncle Frank followed him, which seemed weird since Frank still had half a Budweiser next to his plate, but nobody else appeared to notice, too busy laughing at Steve's impression of the crypto guy explaining blockchain. The twins were flinging mashed potatoes at each other with their spoons, and Amanda had given up trying to stop them, just holding her wine glass away from the splash zone while Mom pretended not to see the mess accumulating on her carpet. Through the kitchen doorway, I could hear Dad and Frank's voices low at first, the clink of bottles then gradually getting louder, though I couldn't make out the words over Steve's story and the kids giggling. Mom kept glancing toward the kitchen, her smile tightening around the edges, and she started cutting her turkey into smaller and smaller pieces without eating any of them. Their voices in the kitchen shifted from conversation to something sharper, Dad's words slurring together while Frank's tone turned hard and insistent. Steve had stopped talking mid-sentence about Bitcoin wallets, and even the twins went quiet, potato-covered spoons suspended in mid-air as we all turned toward the kitchen. Mom set down her fork carefully like she was defusing a bomb, and started to stand when Frank's voice cut through clear as breaking glass. "You think they'll never find out what you did to him?" The silence that followed felt physical, pressing against my eardrums, and Dad stumbled back into the dining room, his face the color of old newspaper, while Frank stood in the doorway behind him, fists clenched at his sides. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, and I watched a drop of gravy slide down the wall where one of the twins had flung it earlier, the only movement in a room that suddenly felt too small and too hot. "What did you just say?" Amanda's voice came out strangled, and she was staring at Dad like she'd never seen him before, while Steve pulled the twins closer to him on the bench. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and he reached for the back of his chair, missing it on the first try. Frank stepped into the dining room, and I noticed his work boots left mud prints on Mom's white carpet, these dark smudges that seemed important somehow, like evidence at a crime scene. "Go ahead, Bill, tell them," Frank said, his voice steady now, controlled, nothing like the drunk rambling from earlier. "Tell them about the Brennan kid, about what really happened that summer." Mom made this sound, not quite a gasp, not quite a sob, and her hand went to her throat where she always touched her pearl necklace when she was nervous, except she wasn't wearing it today. Just an empty space where it should have been. Dad finally found his voice, though it came out raw and desperate. "Frank, you're drunk, you don't know what you're talking about." But his eyes kept darting around the room, landing on everything except our faces. The Brennan kid, I remembered him vaguely. Christopher Brennan, who lived 3 streets over and disappeared the summer I turned 10. Search parties combing the woods behind the elementary school. His picture on every telephone pole for months until the rain washed them away. Frank laughed, but it sounded bitter, poisonous. "Drunk, maybe. But not drunk enough to keep pretending, not after what I saw you burning in that barrel last week. Those things you thought nobody would find." The twins started crying. That confused, scared cry kids do when they know something bad is happening but can't understand what. And Steve was already standing, pulling them toward the door while Amanda grabbed their coats from the hall closet. Her movements sharp and automatic like she was on autopilot. "Everyone just calm down," Mom said, but her voice cracked on the last word, and she was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles looked like white marbles under her skin. Frank shook his head, disgust written across his face. "No, I'm done being calm, done keeping your secrets, Bill. 26 years I've carried this. Watched you play the grieving neighbor when that family put up posters. Watched you at church praying like you weren't the reason that boy never came home." Dad lunged at Frank then, this clumsy, desperate swing that Frank easily stepped away from, and Dad crashed into the china cabinet, Mom's good plates rattling on their stands. I stood up, not sure whether to help Dad or stop him, but my legs felt disconnected from my body, like I was watching everything through frosted glass. Amanda had already left with Steve and the kids, the front door hanging open, cold November air rushing in and mixing with the smell of abandoned turkey and spilled wine. Mom was crying now, these quiet, steady tears that ran down her face while she stood perfectly still, and I realized she wasn't surprised, not really, just defeated, like she'd been waiting for this moment for decades. "The attic," Frank said, looking directly at me now, ignoring Dad who was slumped against the cabinet. "Check the attic, behind the Christmas decorations, in that old steamer trunk he thinks nobody remembers. He couldn't bring himself to destroy everything." Dad made this wounded animal sound and tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't cooperate, and he slid down to sit on the floor, his back against the cabinet, head in his hands. Frank walked past him toward the door, pausing to look back at Mom. "I'm sorry, Diane, but I couldn't watch him teach those twins how to fish in the same spot anymore. Couldn't pretend." Then he was gone, and it was just the three of us in that dining room that suddenly felt like a crime scene. The good china still set out like props in a play nobody wanted to finish. I don't remember making the decision to go upstairs, but suddenly I was pulling down the attic ladder, the hinges screaming in protest like they always did, that sound that used to terrify me as a kid because I thought it was ghosts. Mom had followed me, moving like a sleepwalker, while Dad stayed downstairs and I could hear him mumbling to himself, the words blurred and meaningless. The attic smelled like mothballs and old insulation, that thick, dusty air that coats your throat, and I had to duck under the beams using my phone's flashlight to navigate past boxes labeled in Mom's neat handwriting. Baby clothes, wedding, school papers. Behind the tower of Christmas decoration boxes, covered in a thick layer of dust, sat the steamer trunk Frank had mentioned, its leather straps cracked with age, the brass buckles green with tarnish. The lock had been broken years ago, probably before I was born, and the lid opened with a soft groan that seemed too loud in the cramped space. Inside, underneath a moldy blanket that fell apart when I touched it, I found them. A child's sneaker, just one, the red stripes faded to pink, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles wallet with $3 still inside, and at the bottom, wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age, a newspaper from July 1998. The headline read, "Local boy missing for third day, search continues." And there was Christopher Brennan's school photo, that gap-toothed smile every third grader had, his hair sticking up in the back despite what was probably his mother's best efforts with a comb. But it was what lay beneath the newspaper that made my chest tighten. Dad's work shirt from the plant, the one with his name embroidered on the pocket, stained with something dark that had turned rust-colored over the years, and caught in the fabric, several strands of hair, lighter than Dad's, lighter than anyone's in our family. Mom stood behind me, her breathing shallow and quick, and when I turned to look at her, she seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 minutes, her face gray in the dim light from my phone. "I always wondered," she whispered, and it wasn't clear if she was talking to me or herself, why he insisted on moving Christopher's bike from the garage to the shed that night, why he spent hours cleaning his truck when it wasn't even dirty. She reached past me and picked up the wallet, turning it over in her hands like it might dissolve, and I saw her shoulders start to shake. Frank tried to tell me something was wrong back then, but I didn't want to hear it. Didn't want to believe that the man I married, the father of my children. She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. We could hear sirens in the distance getting closer, and I realized Frank must have called them after he left. Must have finally decided that 26 years of silence was enough. I helped Mom down from the attic, both of us moving like we were underwater, every step requiring enormous effort. Dad was gone from the dining room, but his car keys still sat on the counter, so he couldn't have gotten far. Probably hiding in his workshop with those stupid birdhouses, surrounded by the tools he'd used for God knows what. Mom called Amanda, her voice surprisingly steady as she told her not to come back, to take the boys somewhere safe for the night. And I could hear Amanda crying on the other end, asking questions Mom couldn't answer. The police arrived within minutes, 2 cruisers and an unmarked car, and they sealed off the house like something from a TV show. Yellow tape across the door, evidence bags for everything in that trunk. They found Dad in the workshop like I'd guessed, passed out next to a half-empty bottle of whiskey, sawdust in his hair, and they took him away in handcuffs while the neighbors watched from their windows, probably thinking this was about drunk driving or a domestic dispute, having no idea that they'd been living next to a monster for decades. Mom went to stay with her sister in Ohio, couldn't bear to sleep in that house again, and I drove back to my apartment in a daze, the radio playing holiday music that sounded like it was coming from another planet. The Brennan family finally got their answers, though I'm not sure if that made things better or worse, and Dad's trial starts next month, though his lawyer is already talking about diminished capacity, about how alcohol destroyed his judgment that night so long ago. Mom filed for divorce, sold the house to a young couple who didn't care about its history, just saw a good deal in a nice neighborhood, and that Lions flag probably still hangs from the porch, faded and forgotten, like nothing ever happened there at all. My brother Patrick kept asking if I really wanted to do this, right up until he walked through my front door carrying 2 pies his wife had made. 5 months earlier, I'd bought my first house, a colonial on a quiet street in Pennsylvania, and hosting Thanksgiving seemed like the perfect way to show everyone I'd finally gotten my life together. 31 and divorced, but at least I had granite countertops and a dining room that could fit the whole family if we squeezed. My youngest sister brought her 3 kids. My parents drove down from Scranton with enough wine to stock a restaurant, and by noon, my house was fuller than it had ever been. The kitchen windows fogging up from the heat of the oven, kids racing through hallways I'd just finished painting. Everyone kept complimenting the house, touching the crown molding, admiring the built-in bookshelves, and I walked around refilling drinks with this stupid grin on my face, finally feeling like the successful older brother instead of the one who'd moved back home after his marriage fell apart. The kids wanted to see the backyard, all 7 of them, ranging from my nephew who'd just started walking to my sister's oldest, who was almost 13. I remember unlocking the back door, the one off the kitchen that led to the deck, warning them about the steps being slippery from the morning frost that hadn't quite melted. They tumbled outside in a chaos of jackets and sneakers, and I turned back to check the turkey, calling over my shoulder for them to stay where I could see them through the window. My brother-in-law Carl was telling some story about his boss. Everyone gathered in the living room laughing, and I was focused on whether I'd remembered to put butter under the turkey skin, the sounds of family filling up every corner of my new house. When the kids came back inside maybe 20 minutes later, their cheeks red from the cold, tracking leaves across my clean floors, I didn't think to check if anyone had locked the door behind them. Dinner went better than I could have imagined, everyone finding their seats after some shuffling. The dining room table extended with both leaves, card tables pushed against the ends to make one long banquet setup. My dad carved the turkey while making the same jokes he'd been making since I was 5. My mom kept getting up to help, even though I told her to sit. and Patrick's wife Susan took photos of everything with her phone, saying she wanted to document my first hosting. The gravy was perfect. Nobody mentioned that the rolls were slightly burned on the bottom, and even my teenage niece, who usually ate nothing but chicken nuggets, tried the green bean casserole. We went around the table saying what we were thankful for, and when it got to me, I said something about family and new beginnings. But what I really meant was that I was thankful they'd all shown up, that they trusted me enough to break tradition and drive to my house instead of gathering at my parents' place like we'd done for 30 years. By the time we got to dessert, the sun had already set, which happens early in late November, and I'd turned on every light in the house to keep that warm feeling going. The kids were getting restless, sent back outside earlier with flashlights to burn off energy while the adults lingered over coffee and pie. My Aunt Helen was deep into her second glass of wine, telling embarrassing stories about my dad when they were kids, and I was in the kitchen cutting a third pumpkin pie when everything went dark. Not just the lights, but the hum of the refrigerator, the dishwasher I'd just started. Everything electrical just stopped. In the sudden quiet, we could hear the kids outside screaming, though it sounded more like excitement than fear, probably thinking the power outage was some kind of adventure. I had a flashlight in the kitchen drawer, one of those heavy metal ones I'd bought when I first moved in, thinking about being a responsible homeowner. The fireplace in the living room was still going, thank God, casting these orange shadows that danced across everyone's faces as they pulled out their phones for light. Except none of the phones were working right. The screens lighting up but showing no signal, no Wi-Fi, like we'd been cut off from everything beyond these walls. Patrick tried to make a joke about it being like the old days, but his voice had this edge to it, and Susan kept trying to call her mother, who was watching their baby. My dad went to check the circuit breaker in the basement while Carl and I gathered candles from around the house, those decorative ones I'd bought to make the place smell like vanilla and cinnamon. We were all trying to act normal, keep the mood light for the kids who'd come rushing back inside, but there was this weight in the air, this wrongness that made everyone speak in lower voices. That's when I saw it. Just a glimpse at first, while carrying candles from the hallway closet back to the dining room. A shape moving past the window in the study, the room I'd turned into a home office, where nobody should have been. My first thought was that one of the kids had wandered in there, maybe looking for something to do without their tablets working. But all 7 of them were in the living room, huddled around the fireplace while my mom told them stories. I stood there in the doorway counting them again. Owen, Madison, all of them accounted for. And when I looked back toward the study, the door was slightly open, though I knew I'd closed it that morning after wrapping the last of the presents I'd hidden in there. The smart thing would have been to say something right then, get everyone together, but I didn't want to ruin everything. Didn't want to be the paranoid divorced guy who panics over shadows at his first family gathering. I walked down the hallway, each floorboard creaking under my weight, sounds I'd never noticed before when the house was full of electrical humming and family noise. The study door was definitely open now, maybe 6 inches, and through the gap I could see the curtains moving, even though the windows were closed. My desk lamp was on the floor, the ceramic base shattered into pieces that caught the dim light from the hallway, and the rolling chair was facing the wrong direction, turned toward the closet instead of the desk. But the worst part was the smell, this mixture of wet earth and something chemical, like fertilizer mixed with gasoline, completely different from the turkey and pie scents that filled the rest of the house. I pushed the door open wider, holding my flashlight like a weapon, and that's when I noticed the muddy footprints on my Persian rug, large boots that had walked from the window to the desk, then to the closet where the door stood partially open, darkness pooling inside like spilled ink. Patrick found me standing there staring at that closet door, and when he saw my face, he immediately grabbed my arm, pulling me backward into the hallway. He'd come looking because Dad couldn't find the circuit box in the basement, said it looked like someone had removed the panel cover and taken all the fuses, just pulled them right out and left empty holes. We both looked at each other, understanding passing between us without words. And then we heard Susan scream from the living room, not a startled yelp, but a real, throat-tearing sound that made us both run. She was standing by the fireplace pointing at the kitchen doorway, where a man none of us recognized stood perfectly still, wearing a thick canvas jacket and work boots caked with mud. He had this weathered face, deep lines around his mouth and eyes, gray stubble covering his jaw, and he was holding one of my kitchen knives, the big one I'd used to carve the turkey, just holding it down by his side like he'd been interrupted in the middle of something. Nobody moved for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. The kids pressed against my mother on the couch, my dad stepping slowly in front of them, while Carl grabbed a poker from the fireplace. The man didn't say anything, just stood there breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling under that stained jacket, and I could see now that his jeans were torn at the knee, dried blood visible on the fabric. His eyes kept moving from face to face, not wild or crazy, but calculating, like he was counting us, figuring out the odds. Patrick whispered for Susan to take the kids upstairs, but when she tried to move, the man shifted the knife to his other hand, a small gesture that froze everyone in place. The firelight made the blade gleam orange and red, and I noticed his knuckles were scraped raw, bits of skin hanging loose like he'd been punching something or someone before he got to my house. I tried to speak, to ask what he wanted, if he needed help, anything to break this terrible silence, but my throat felt sealed shut. Then my nephew Owen, only 4 years old, started crying, that exhausted, scared wail that little kids do when they're beyond comfort, and it broke whatever spell was holding us. The man took a step forward and Carl swung the poker, not at him but at the wall, screaming for him to get back, get out, leave us alone. The sound was explosive in the quiet house, and suddenly everyone was moving. My sisters pulling their kids behind furniture, my Aunt Helen throwing her wine glass which shattered against the door frame, red wine splashing across the white paint like blood. The man stumbled backward, not from being hit but from the chaos, the knife clattering to the floor as he raised his hands to shield his face from the shower of glass and liquid. And that's when I saw the second one, a younger guy, maybe 20, standing at the top of the stairs just watching everything unfold with this blank expression. The younger one started down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, and Patrick grabbed a brass candlestick from the mantel, shouting at him to stop. But he kept coming. My dad, 67 years old with a bad hip, charged at the older man who was still recovering from Helen's wine glass attack, tackling him into the wall, with a sound that shook picture frames off their hooks. They went down hard, the intruder's head hitting the hardwood with a crack that made everyone gasp, and Carl jumped on top, pinning his arms while my dad rolled away gasping. The younger one reached the bottom of the stairs and I moved without thinking. All that anger about the divorce, the loneliness, the pressure of this perfect Thanksgiving exploding out as I grabbed him by his flannel shirt and drove him backward into the grandfather clock my parents had given me as a housewarming gift. The glass face shattered, the pendulum swinging wildly as we crashed through it, and I could hear my mother screaming my name, my sisters crying, chaos erupting through my perfect new house. Patrick hit the younger one with the candlestick while I had him pinned against the broken clock once, twice, until he slumped sideways, blood running from his ear. The older man was trying to get up, Carl struggling to hold him down, when we heard it clear and sharp through the broken silence. Sirens approaching fast. My 13-year-old niece Madison was standing by the window holding her phone up, and she said in this tiny voice that she'd found a spot near the glass where she got 1 bar of signal, just enough to call 911 before it cut out again. The older intruder stopped struggling when he heard the sirens, just lay there on my floor staring at the ceiling, while the younger one moaned against the destroyed grandfather clock. We held them there, my family forming a circle around these strangers who'd invaded our Thanksgiving, until red and blue lights flooded through the windows and police officers came through both the front and back doors, weapons drawn, shouting for everyone to get down, to show their hands, turning our family gathering into a crime scene. Later, after the ambulances took both men away and the police finished taking our statements, we learned they were father and son, had been breaking into houses all over the county during family gatherings when they knew people would be distracted. They'd hit 3 other homes that same day, stealing cash, jewelry, whatever they could grab while families ate dinner in the next room. The police found a van parked 2 streets over with bags of stolen items, including things from my study that I hadn't even noticed were missing. My laptop, some silver cufflinks from my wedding that I'd kept despite everything, even the bottle of expensive bourbon I'd been saving for a special occasion. The cops said we were lucky, that usually these guys were in and out without anyone knowing. But something had gone wrong with their plan. Maybe they'd gotten greedy or lost track of time. And when the power went out, when we all started moving around with flashlights and candles, they'd gotten trapped in the house with us. We spent the rest of the night at Patrick's place, nobody wanting to stay in my house with the blood on the floors, the broken clock, the wine stains on the walls that looked like violence itself. The kids were remarkably okay, treating it like some wild adventure they'd survived, already making up stories about how brave they'd been. My dad's hip was bruised but not broken. Carl had cuts on his hands from the struggle, and I couldn't stop pacing, couldn't stop thinking about that unlocked back door, how easily everything had turned from celebration to nightmare. But here's the thing nobody talks about when something like this happens. We were closer after that night than we'd ever been before, bonded by something deeper than blood or tradition. We still do Thanksgiving together every year, but now we rotate houses and everyone triple checks the locks, and we laugh about things that aren't really funny, like how Aunt Helen's wine-throwing arm should be in the major leagues, or how Madison saved us all with 1 bar of cell signal. We never found out why the phone stopped working or who cut the power. The police said the intruders denied doing it, but it doesn't matter now. What matters is that we survived it together, that my first Thanksgiving in my new house became the story we'll tell forever. The year we fought back, the year we discovered what family really means when everything goes dark. Thanksgiving morning always meant the same thing in our house. Controlled chaos, the smell of butter melting in the oven, and me triple-checking that we had enough chairs around the dining table. My in-laws were flying in from Arizona that year, November 2016, and Greg left before sunrise to pick them up from Newark. Their flight was supposed to land at 7 in the morning, which meant he'd be back by 9:30, maybe 10 if traffic was bad. I remember standing in the doorway in my pajamas, watching his taillights disappear down our street in Trenton, New Jersey. He kissed my forehead, told me to start the turkey without him, and promised he'd call when he got his parents. That was the last normal moment I had, the last time everything made sense. I went back inside, put on coffee, and started prepping the sweet potatoes, completely unaware that my entire life was about to shatter into a million pieces I'd never be able to put back together. By 11 o'clock, I started getting annoyed. Greg hadn't called, and neither had his parents. I tried his cell 3 times and it went straight to voicemail, which wasn't unusual since he sometimes forgot to charge it overnight. But his mom, Barbara, she always had her phone on, always. When I called her and got her voicemail too, I figured maybe their flight was delayed and everyone was stuck in some dead zone at the airport. I texted Greg a few times, asking for updates, telling him the turkey was in, and asking if his dad still wanted the cranberry sauce with the orange zest or the regular kind. Stupid details that felt so important then. By noon, my sister Jenna came over to help with the cooking, and she could tell something was wrong. I kept checking my phone every 30 seconds, refreshing my messages, pacing between the kitchen and the living room window like I'd see his car pull up any second. Jenna tried to calm me down, said maybe they stopped for breakfast. Maybe there was an accident on the turnpike and traffic was backed up for miles. But I knew Greg. He would have found a way to call. He always did. Around 1 in the afternoon, I finally called the airline directly. The woman on the phone confirmed that Barbara and Richard Sutton had been on the flight, that it had landed on time at 7:04 that morning, and that they'd already picked up their luggage. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear her. If they'd landed, if they'd gotten their bags, then where were they? Where was Greg? I called Barbara's cell again, and when it went to voicemail for the 6th time, real panic set in. That cold, creeping feeling that starts in your chest and spreads through your whole body until you can't think straight. Jenna saw my face go white and took the phone from my hand. She's always been the calm one, the logical one. She suggested we call the hospitals just in case there'd been an accident and nobody had been able to reach me yet. We spent the next hour calling every emergency room between Trenton and Newark, describing Greg, giving them his information. Nothing. No John Does matching his description. No accidents reported involving his car. A dark blue Honda Accord with a dent in the back bumper from when he'd backed into our mailbox last spring. That's when Jenna said we should call the police. I didn't want to. It felt like an overreaction, like I was being paranoid, like any second he'd walk through the door with some crazy explanation, and we'd all laugh about how worried I'd been. But it was almost 3 o'clock by then, and 8 hours had passed since he'd left. 8 hours with zero contact. The officer who answered my call was polite, but didn't seem particularly concerned at first. Adults go missing all the time, he told me. Usually they turn up within 24 hours. He took down Greg's information, the make and model of his car, his license plate number. He asked if we'd been fighting, if there was any reason Greg might have wanted to take off for a while. I almost laughed at that. Greg wasn't the type to just disappear. We'd been married for 6 years, together for 9. He was a software engineer who color-coded his calendar and set reminders for everything. He didn't do spontaneous. The officer said he'd put out a bulletin for the car and told me to call back if I didn't hear anything by morning. Morning felt like a lifetime away. By 4 o'clock, Barbara and Richard still hadn't answered their phones, and I was losing my mind. Jenna suggested we drive to the airport ourselves, see if maybe they were still there, confused or waiting. It was a desperate idea, but I was desperate. We got in her car and drove to Newark, and the whole way there I kept imagining scenarios. Maybe Greg's phone had died, and he'd borrowed someone else's but didn't know my number by heart. Maybe there'd been some miscommunication about which terminal. Maybe his parents had missed their flight after all, and the airline had given me wrong information. When we got there, we went straight to the baggage claim area for their airline. We asked everyone, security guards, airline staff, janitors. Nobody had seen Greg or his parents. We checked the parking garage, walking up and down the aisles looking for his car, and it wasn't there either. On the drive back home, neither of us said much. The sun was setting, the sky turning that dark orange color that usually made me feel peaceful. But that night, it just felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. When we pulled into my driveway and I saw the house with all the lights on and the half-prepared Thanksgiving dinner sitting on the counter, I finally broke down. Jenna held me in the passenger seat while I sobbed, my whole body shaking with the kind of fear I'd never felt before. The police showed up at my house around 8 that night. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, both wearing plain clothes and serious expressions that made my stomach twist into knots. They introduced themselves as Detective Mills and Detective Vasquez. They wanted to know everything, so I walked them through the entire day, every detail I could remember. What time Greg left, what he was wearing, a gray Rutgers hoodie and jeans, what route he would have taken to the airport, whether he'd seemed upset or distracted that morning. He hadn't. He'd been completely normal, excited even, talking about how his dad would probably want to watch football after dinner. They asked about our relationship, our finances, whether Greg had any enemies or problems at work. The questions felt invasive, almost accusatory, like they were implying Greg had chosen to leave. I kept telling them he wouldn't do that. He wasn't that kind of person, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. Detective Vasquez asked if I had a recent photo of Greg, and I pulled up one on my phone from 2 weeks earlier. The two of us at a friend's wedding, him in a navy suit with his arm around my waist, both of us smiling. She studied it for a long moment before asking if she could send it to herself. That's when it really hit me. They were looking for him. My husband was officially a missing person. The next morning, I woke up on the couch where I'd finally passed out around 3 in the morning, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. For about 5 seconds, I thought maybe it had all been a nightmare. Then I saw Jenna asleep in the armchair across from me, still in her jacket, and reality came crashing back. My phone had 11 missed calls, 3 from Detective Mills, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 6 from Greg's work. I called Mills back immediately, and what he told me made everything so much worse. They'd found Greg's car. It was at a gas station off Route 1 in New Brunswick, about 20 miles from our house and nowhere near the route to Newark Airport. The car was locked, keys still in the ignition, his wallet on the passenger's seat with all his credit cards and $200 in cash still inside. His phone was there too, completely dead. The gas station owner had noticed the car in his lot around noon on Thanksgiving and figured someone would come back for it, but when it was still there Friday morning, he'd called it in. Mills said they were pulling the surveillance footage from the gas station and would be in touch. He told me to stay home, stay by my phone, like I could do anything else. Detective Mills called me back 3 hours later, and his voice sounded different, tighter, more urgent. They'd reviewed the footage from the gas station, and he needed me to come down to the station to look at it. Jenna drove me there, and the whole way I felt like I was going to throw up. When we got to the police station, they brought me into a small room with a computer monitor. Mills warned me that what I was about to see might be upsetting, but that they needed me to watch carefully, see if I recognized anyone. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, black and white. Timestamp showing 6:42 in the morning on Thanksgiving. I watched Greg's car pull up to pump number 4. I watched him get out, scan his credit card, start pumping gas. He was on his phone, probably checking the time or his parents' flight status. Then, about 2 minutes in, a man approached him. The man was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low, and he seemed to be asking Greg something, gesturing toward his own car parked at the pump behind Greg's. Greg put his phone in his pocket and walked over with the man, out of frame. That was it. 30 seconds later, the pump clicked off, but Greg never came back to hang it up. The nozzle just hung there, dripping onto the pavement. His car sat there, door still open for the rest of the footage. He never came back. I must have watched that footage 20 times, trying to see something, anything that would help. The man's face was completely obscured by the cap and the angle of the camera. You couldn't see a license plate on his car either, just that it was a light-colored sedan, maybe white or silver. Detective Vasquez asked if the man looked familiar, if Greg had mentioned meeting anyone that morning, if he'd seemed nervous about anything lately. I had nothing to give them. Greg hadn't mentioned anything unusual. He'd been working on a project at his office, complained about his boss being demanding, talked about maybe taking a vacation in the spring. Normal stuff, normal life. Mills told me they were treating this as an abduction, that they'd put out alerts to surrounding states, that they were checking traffic cameras along Route 1 to try to track where the sedan went after leaving the gas station. He used words like, escalate the investigation and all available resources, but I could barely process any of it. All I could see in my mind was Greg walking out of frame with that stranger, trustingly, helpfully, having no idea he'd never be seen again. The detective asked if I wanted victim services, someone to talk to, but I shook my head. I didn't want to talk. I wanted my husband back. The worst part, the thing that still haunts me, was calling Barbara and Richard. They'd been stranded at Newark Airport the entire time, confused and increasingly panicked when Greg never showed up. Airport security had eventually helped them file a report, and they'd gotten a hotel room near the airport, waiting for news. When I called and told Barbara that Greg was missing, that he'd apparently never even made it to the airport, her scream on the other end of the line was something I'll never forget. This raw animal sound of a mother realizing her son was gone. They took the first available flight back to Arizona the next day. Richard kept saying they never should have asked Greg to pick them up, that they should have just taken a cab, as if any of this was their fault. I tried to tell them it wasn't, but the words felt hollow. Everyone was drowning in guilt and questions. Why had Greg pulled off on Route 1? Why had he stopped at that specific gas station? Had the man been following him, or was it random? Had Greg recognized him? The police said most abductions are committed by someone the victim knows, but I couldn't think of a single person who'd want to hurt Greg. He was quiet, kind, kept to himself mostly. He had work friends, but nobody he was especially close to. No drama, no debts, no secret life that I knew about. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation went cold. The police tracked the sedan to a highway entrance but lost it in traffic. They interviewed everyone Greg knew, pulled his phone records, checked his email and bank accounts. Nothing pointed anywhere. No ransom calls came, no body was found. Tips came in from all over, people claiming they'd seen Greg in Florida, in Texas, in California. Every single one led nowhere. Detective Mills would call me with updates that weren't really updates, just ways of saying they still had nothing. The media picked up the story for a while. Local man vanishes on Thanksgiving morning, and family desperate for answers in mysterious disappearance. My face was on the news, pleading for information, offering a reward we couldn't really afford. Strangers sent messages of support and conspiracy theories in equal measure. Some said Greg had run away to start a new life. Others said it was human trafficking. A few even suggested I'd done something to him and staged the whole thing. The cruelty of people when they think they're being helpful is something I wasn't prepared for. Greg's job held his position open for 3 months before they had to officially let him go. I couldn't go back to my work at the dental office. Every time I tried, I'd have a panic attack in the parking lot. Jenna moved in with me for a while because I couldn't stand being alone in the house. Everything reminded me of him. His coffee mug in the cabinet, his shoes by the door, the dent in the couch where he always sat. It's been 9 years now. 9 years since that Thanksgiving morning, and I still don't have answers. The case is officially cold, though Mills retired and the new detective assigned to it calls me once a year on the anniversary, more out of obligation than hope. I've learned to live with the not knowing, though it never gets easier. People ask me all the time if I've moved on, if I've dated anyone, if I've considered having Greg declared legally dead so I can get closure. The truth is, I can't. Some part of me is still waiting for him to walk through that door with an explanation, no matter how impossible that seems. I've gone to therapy, joined support groups for families of missing persons, done everything people suggested. It helps, in small ways. I can function now. I went back to work eventually, moved to a different apartment because I couldn't stay in that house. But there's this permanent hole in my life, this question mark that will never be answered. Who was that man at the gas station? What did he want? Where did he take Greg? Is my husband even still alive, or did he die that morning and I've spent 9 years waiting for a ghost? The hardest thing is how ordinary it all was. Greg wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't in a dangerous place or taking risks. He was getting gas on his way to pick up his parents, being a good son, and someone took him, just like that, in broad daylight at a gas station off a major highway, and nobody saw anything useful. No witnesses came forward. The man in the baseball cap vanished like smoke. Sometimes I drive past that gas station, even though I know I shouldn't. It's still there, same pumps, same building. Pump number 4 is where I always stop when I need gas now. Some kind of twisted ritual I can't explain. I stand there and try to imagine what Greg was thinking in those last moments before he walked away. Did he sense danger? Did the man say something threatening? Or was Greg just being his usual helpful self, the kind of person who'd stop to help a stranger without a second thought? That's what kills me the most. Greg's kindness, the thing I loved about him, might be what got him taken. I want people reading this to understand something. This can happen to anyone. Your husband, your wife, your kid. One moment they're there, living their normal life, and the next they're gone. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. And you're left with nothing but questions and security footage that shows the exact moment your entire world ended. I still check my phone sometimes, half expecting to see a text from Greg apologizing for being late. I know that's insane, but hope doesn't follow logic. It just exists, stubborn and painful, even when it shouldn't. If anyone out there knows anything about what happened that morning, if you saw something, if you remember a light-colored sedan, or a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap near New Brunswick on Thanksgiving 2016, please come forward. Even now, after all this time, I just want to know what happened to my husband. I just want to bring him home." I hadn't been home for Thanksgiving in 6 years. Not since Dad passed away in that car accident on Interstate 95, the one that made the local news because of how sudden it was. Mom had been calling more frequently lately, her voice getting smaller each time, and my sister Emily kept sending these guilt-trip texts about how Mom was cooking for just herself now. I caved in October, booked the flight from Denver to Boston, and tried not to think too much about why I'd stayed away so long. The house looked exactly the same when I pulled into the driveway. That white colonial with the green shutters on Birch Road, except the garden Mom used to obsess over had gone wild, roses climbing up the mailbox like they were trying to escape. Dinner started normal enough. Emily brought her husband Kevin and their twin boys, who immediately ran upstairs to what used to be my bedroom. Mom had made her usual spread: turkey that was slightly dry, stuffing with too much sage, the cranberry sauce from the can that Dad always insisted on. We were doing that awkward thing families do when they haven't been together in years, talking about nothing important, when Mom suddenly went quiet in the middle of describing her book club. She was looking at Emily with this strange expression, something between panic and warning, and then she said it. "Did you remember to bring those old photo albums from the room downstairs? I thought maybe the boys would like to see them." The temperature in that dining room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emily's fork clattered against her plate. Kevin stopped chewing. Even the twins got quiet upstairs, like the whole house was holding its breath. "What room downstairs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but I could hear how sharp it came out. Mom's face went pale, that papery white that made all her freckles stand out like spots on old parchment. Emily shot her this look, the kind of look that said, "Shut up, abort mission. We talked about this." "Oh, I just meant the basement," Mom stammered, reaching for her wine glass with a hand that trembled enough to make the liquid shimmer. "You know how I get confused sometimes. The basement storage area, that's all." But I'd lived in that house for 18 years before college, and my mother had never, not once, called the basement anything except the basement. She was sharp as a tack, did the newspaper crossword in pen every morning, never forgot a birthday or a doctor's appointment. Kevin cleared his throat and started talking loudly about some football game, and Emily jumped in with something about the twins' school play, and just like that, everyone was pretending that moment hadn't happened. I couldn't let it go. After dinner, while Emily and Kevin were getting the boys ready to leave, and Mom was in the kitchen wrapping leftovers in aluminum foil with that obsessive precision she'd always had, I went to the basement door. It was in the hallway near the kitchen, same place it had always been, that hollow wooden door with the glass knob that never quite caught properly. The hinges creaked when I opened it, and that smell hit me immediately. Not the usual basement smell of concrete and old cardboard boxes. This was different, sharper, like industrial cleaner trying to mask something organic underneath. The stairs were the same ones I'd walked down 1,000 times as a kid, going down to grab a can of tomato paste for Mom, or to find Christmas decorations in storage. But they felt steeper now, more threatening in the yellow light from the single bulb at the top. When I reached the bottom, I stood there on the cold concrete floor, looking around at the familiar landscape of my childhood's overflow. The furnace hummed in the corner where it always had. The shelves Dad built were still there, sagging under boxes labeled in Mom's neat handwriting. Christmas ornaments, Easter decorations, Emily's baby clothes. The old ping-pong table folded against the wall, its surface covered in dust thick enough to write in. Everything was exactly where I remembered it, except for one thing. On the far wall, past the water heater and the ancient freezer that hadn't worked since 2009, there was a door. A heavy wooden door with a deadbolt lock, painted the same dull gray as the concrete walls, like someone had tried to make it disappear. I walked toward it slowly, my sneakers making soft squeaking sounds on the floor, and I realized with absolute certainty that this door had never been here before. I would have remembered. I used to play down here on rainy days, used to help Dad organize his tools, used to hide behind those shelves when Emily and I played hide and seek. That wall had been blank, just concrete, and one of Dad's old Red Sox pennants hanging from a nail. The deadbolt was new, the metal still shiny, not like the rusty fixtures on everything else down here. But hanging on a small hook next to the fuse box, maybe 3 feet from the door, was a single key on a rubber keychain shaped like a lobster, the kind you get at tourist shops on the Cape. My hand was steady when I reached for it, which surprised me because inside my chest my heart was going like a jackhammer. I should have gone back upstairs, should have confronted Mom and Emily, demanded to know what they were hiding. But I didn't. I walked to that door, slid the key into the deadbolt, and heard the mechanism click open with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet basement. The door swung inward when I pushed it, revealing darkness and a smell that made my throat close up. That chemical cleaner smell, but stronger now, mixed with something damp and rotten like old carpet that had gotten wet and never dried properly. I fumbled along the wall inside until I found a light switch, one of those old toggle switches that clicked loudly. A bare bulb flickered on, weaker than the one lighting the main basement, casting everything in sickly yellow shadows. The room was smaller than I expected, maybe 10 feet by 12, with concrete walls and floor just like the rest of the basement. But this wasn't storage. There was a metal frame bed pushed against one wall, just the frame with no mattress, and bolted to the floor near the foot of it were 2 heavy chains, the kind you might use to secure a boat or tow a truck. The ends had thick metal cuffs, hinged and lined with something that might have been rubber once but was now cracked and stained dark. On the opposite wall, someone had installed metal brackets, the kind used for shelving, but there were no shelves. Just the brackets positioned at different heights like measurement marks. A folding chair sat in the corner, and on it was a spiral notebook, the cover water-damaged and warped. My legs felt disconnected from my body as I walked to that chair, picked up the notebook with fingers that didn't seem like mine. The first few pages were grocery lists in Mom's handwriting, completely normal, milk and bread and chicken breasts. Then the list stopped, and there were dates. Just dates, written in Dad's blocky print starting in November 2006 and continuing for years. Next to each date was a number, ranging from 2 to 16. No context, no explanation, just date after date after date. The last entry from March 2014. I was at college in 2006, starting my freshman year at UMass Amherst, calling home every Sunday and talking about classes and roommates and nothing important. I flipped faster through the pages, and toward the back I found something that made the room tilt sideways. Polaroid photographs, maybe 20 of them, tucked between pages. They showed this room, but not empty like it was now. They showed people, different people sitting in that chair or standing against the wall with the brackets. Their faces were blurred out with black marker, thick scribbles that made them anonymous, but you could see they were conscious, staring at the camera, and every single one of them was holding a piece of paper with a date written on it. I dropped the notebook and heard something shift beneath the chair, a hollow sound like something sliding. When I bent down, barely able to breathe now, I saw that one of the concrete floor tiles was loose. I pried it up with my fingernails, breaking 2 of them, and underneath was a shallow space, maybe 4 inches deep. Inside were ID cards, driver's licenses, all from different states. Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine. I counted 11 of them. Young people, early 20s mostly, men and women with hopeful faces staring out from the plastic cards. I recognized one immediately because her face had been everywhere in 2007, plastered on telephone poles and news broadcasts. Jennifer Huang, missing from a rest stop outside Albany in November 2006. I'd been 17 when that happened, and Mom had gotten so paranoid she wouldn't let me drive anywhere alone for months. Under the IDs was a folded piece of paper, official looking, with the letterhead of the Massachusetts State Police. It was a report, typed and formal, and my father's name was at the top. Detective Vincent Mercer, badge 2847. The report detailed an investigation into a suspected trafficking operation along Interstate 95. young people disappearing from rest stops and gas stations between 2004 and 2009. There were names, dates, locations. And there, in the middle of the second page, was a paragraph that made my vision blur around the edges. Detective Mercer has been placed on administrative leave, pending internal investigation into evidence tampering and obstruction. Multiple witnesses have recanted statements after private meetings with Detective Mercer. Physical evidence from 3 separate cases has been reported missing from the evidence locker to which Detective Mercer had access. Investigation ongoing. The date on the report was January 2009. Dad retired in March 2009, took early retirement for health reasons, and we'd never questioned it because he'd seemed fine, just said he wanted to spend more time with family. The report was signed by someone named Captain Howard Brennan, and at the bottom, written in pen, was a handwritten note. "Vincent, we know. Leave now or we file charges. Your family doesn't need to know why." I don't know how long I sat on that concrete floor with those IDs spread around me like playing cards. Could have been 5 minutes. Could have been an hour. My brain kept trying to make it make sense, kept trying to find some other explanation, but there wasn't one. My father had done this, had brought these people here, kept them in this room for days or weeks, and then what? The dates in the notebook stopped in 2014, a full year before his accident. I heard footsteps on the stairs and Mom's voice calling my name, getting closer, more urgent. When she appeared in the doorway, she stopped like she'd hit an invisible wall. Her face went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds, landing on something that looked like defeat. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said quietly, and her voice had none of the tremor from dinner, just flat acceptance. Emily appeared behind her, and she wasn't surprised at all. They'd both known. They'd always known. "We found it 6 months after the funeral," Mom said, coming into the room slowly, like she was approaching a wounded animal. "Emily came to help me clean out his things from the garage, and we found the key in his toolbox with that police report folded inside. We came down here together and saw all of it." She gestured weakly at the chains, the brackets, the notebook I'd dropped on the floor. "We didn't know what to do. If we went to the police, his pension would be gone, the house would be taken, and those people, those families, they'd been through enough without dragging it all back up. He was already dead. We couldn't bring him to justice or bring those people back." Emily was crying silently, her arms wrapped around herself. "We cleaned it as best we could, sealed the door, tried to forget it existed. But Mom keeps slipping up, especially when she's nervous, mentions it without thinking. I gathered up all the IDs, the report, the notebook, every photograph, and put them in a plastic storage bin I found on one of the shelves. Mom and Emily watched me do it without saying a word. When I was done, I looked at them both and said the only thing I could think to say: "I'm taking these with me. I'm going to sit with this for a while and figure out what to do." Mom started to protest, her hand reaching out, but Emily stopped her with a look. The drive back to my hotel that night was a blur of streetlights and stop signs that I barely registered. I kept the bin in my hotel room, couldn't leave it in the car, couldn't let it out of my sight. For 2 weeks I didn't sleep much, just kept going through everything, researching each name on those IDs, finding their families online, seeing the missing persons pages that some of them still had up after all these years. Jennifer Huang's mother had died in 2012. Her father remarried and moved to California. Some of the others had families still searching, still posting anniversary appeals on social media. In the end, I did what I think my father's victims deserved. I called a lawyer first, explained the situation hypothetically, learned about statutes of limitations and evidence chains and what could actually be done this many years later. Then I made copies of everything, every document, every photo, every ID. I sent the copies anonymously to the Massachusetts State Police Cold Case Division with a typed letter explaining where the evidence came from and providing the exact address of the house. I kept the originals locked in a safe deposit box in Denver, along with a letter to be opened if anything happens to me. The police showed up at Mom's house 3 weeks later. She called me crying, said they'd found the room, were tearing it apart, bringing in forensics teams. Emily stopped speaking to me entirely. The news coverage lasted about a month before it faded into the background noise of other tragedies. They confirmed identities on 6 of the 11 IDs through DNA evidence found in that room, gave those families some kind of closure even if it came with nightmares. Mom lost the pension, had to sell the house to pay for lawyers, moved into a small apartment in Worcester that I helped pay for even though she barely speaks to me anymore. I haven't been back to Massachusetts since. I don't think I ever will. I'd been on the road for close to 6 hours that night, trying to make it to my sister's house in time for Thanksgiving the next morning. I had a small rental car, the kind that hums a little too loud at high speed, and a thermos of coffee that had gone lukewarm hours ago. The highway was nearly empty, just stretches of blacktop broken by the occasional truck roaring past. Around midnight, I saw the blue glow of a rest stop sign and figured I'd pull in, stretch my legs and maybe splash some water on my face. The cold night air hit me the second I opened the door, sharp and almost metallic, like it carried a hint of something electrical. The place was dead quiet. Just a single pickup near the entrance and a white van parked diagonally across from me with its engine still running. The rest stoplights flickered every few seconds, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own across the asphalt. I remember thinking it was odd for anyone to leave a van idling that long, especially this late, but maybe the driver was asleep inside. I shrugged it off, locked my car, and started walking toward the restroom building. Halfway there, I noticed the vending machines by the wall were humming unevenly, that low mechanical buzz that almost sounds like breathing if you listen too long. I stretched, rubbed my neck, and checked my phone for signal. Barely one bar. That's when I heard something. It wasn't a full scream or a cry for help, more like the sound someone makes when they're trying not to be heard. It came from behind the tree line just past the rest stop fence. My first thought was that maybe someone's pet had run off, or a couple had pulled over to argue in private. But then she appeared. A woman, barefoot, hair tangled, wearing what looked like pajama pants and a gray hoodie that hung off one shoulder. She stumbled out from between the trees and froze when she saw me. Her voice was barely audible, hoarse and shaking. "Please, don't look at me. Don't draw attention." I just stood there, confused, my mind catching up to her words. Her eyes darted toward the white van, and for a split second I thought I saw movement inside, like a shadow shifting behind the tinted glass. She kept glancing toward the van, whispering for me to stay quiet. I wanted to ask if she was hurt, if someone was following her, but the way she looked, wide-eyed and trembling, made me realize she didn't want to be seen. The sound of the van's engine droned across the lot, steady and low. There was no one in the driver's seat. I took a step back toward my car, trying to process what I was looking at, when she suddenly crouched down behind one of the trash bins near the curb. "They'll see us," she said, barely moving her lips. That word, "they," froze in my head like a splinter. I turned my head just enough to glance back at the van again. The passenger side door cracked open with a metallic creak, slow and deliberate. A sliver of dim interior light spilled onto the pavement, and I caught a glimpse of someone inside. Maybe 2 silhouettes. They weren't talking. They weren't even moving much, just sitting there, facing my direction. My pulse kicked hard in my throat. I started walking, careful not to run, trying to act like nothing was wrong. Every step felt too loud against the concrete, echoing through that hollow space like footsteps in a church. Behind me, the van's engine revved. The sound was subtle, but enough to make the hair on the back of my neck rise. I didn't dare look back until I was halfway to my car. The woman was still crouched, her hand over her mouth now. I unlocked my door, got in, and for a second just sat there, hand hovering over the ignition. That's when the van's sliding door slammed open, loud, metallic, like a gunshot in the still night. I didn't look. I didn't want to see what or who was getting out. I just floored it. My tires screeched against the pavement as I sped out of that rest stop. My hands were gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached, and the only thing I could hear was the engine screaming and my own heartbeat. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the van's headlights blinked on, but they didn't follow me right away. They stayed there, idling in the same spot as I disappeared down the ramp back onto the highway. For a long stretch, I kept expecting them to appear behind me, those same two white beams in the distance. But the road stayed empty. For the next hour or so, I didn't slow down. My GPS told me there was a state police barracks about 20 miles ahead, but I didn't make it that far before calling 911. The dispatcher kept me on the line, asking for the mile marker, the make of the van, and whether I could describe the woman. I told her everything: the bare feet, the way she looked terrified, the running engine, the people sitting still inside. She was quiet for a few seconds before saying they'd already received 2 similar calls that night from drivers along the same stretch of highway. One ended with a missing person report. By the time I pulled into a gas station near the next exit, I could barely hold the phone steady against my ear. The place was bright and noisy, a total contrast to the darkness I'd just left behind. A trooper arrived within minutes and asked me to show him exactly where the rest stop was. When I mentioned the woman, his expression changed. Not surprised, more like frustrated. He said they'd been searching that area for days. Apparently, several travelers had gone missing over the past month, all last seen between mile markers 214 and 238. They took my statement, and I waited around while more officers headed out to check the scene. About an hour later, one of them returned. He didn't say much, just that the van was gone when they arrived, and the woman hadn't been found. They did, however, find fresh tire tracks leading into a dirt trail behind the tree line, the kind that wouldn't show up on any map. The officer told me to keep my doors locked if I planned to continue driving that night, then handed me a card with a case number. I made it to my sister's place the next morning, way later than I'd planned, and I didn't tell her any of it. I didn't sleep that night, and I still haven't taken that route again. A few weeks later, I read an article about a human trafficking ring operating across multiple states, using vans and fake breakdowns to lure people at remote rest stops. It mentioned arrests had been made near that same highway. They didn't say anything about a barefoot woman. Sometimes when I stop at rest areas now, I still glance at the tree line, half expecting her to step out again, whispering for help. Thanksgiving week always made me restless. The highways stretched endlessly, quiet except for the hum of my old Ford Fusion and the occasional pair of headlights cutting through the dark. I'd left work late that night, hoping to beat the holiday rush by driving straight through to my parents' place in southern Indiana. Coffee thermos in the cup holder, talk radio low, and a half-eaten bag of pretzels on the passenger seat. It was the kind of solitude that usually cleared my head. I remember thinking the road felt heavier than usual, like it absorbed the sound instead of echoing it back. Around midnight, the world outside my windshield turned into a tunnel of black trees and yellow lines. Then I spotted the red blink of hazard lights ahead, faint, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. A silver sedan sat half on the shoulder, half on the lane, tilted just slightly like one tire had gone flat. My first thought was someone must have hit debris or maybe ran out of gas. I slowed instinctively, rolled my window down a crack and could see a figure standing beside the car, waving an arm stiffly in the glow of the hazard lights. It didn't feel staged at first, just someone stuck and freezing in the dark. I pulled over a few yards behind, kept my engine running, and grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment. The air outside had that dry, sharp cold that bites the inside of your nose. The person near the car, a man, maybe mid-30s, called out something I couldn't make out over the hum of passing wind. He sounded strained, like his throat hurt. As I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight swept over the rear bumper. And that's when I saw it. Behind the car, a second silhouette moved, crouched low like they were checking the tire, but their position didn't make sense. The person wasn't fixing anything. They were waiting. My pulse jumped before I could rationalize it. I slowed my pace and angled the flashlight so it didn't reveal how tense I suddenly felt. The first man gave a half-hearted smile and said his battery died. His voice had this forced steadiness, like he'd rehearsed the line. The second figure didn't move, just shifted slightly, and I caught a dull glint near their hand. Maybe metal, maybe nothing, but it made my stomach twist. Every instinct screamed to back away calmly, but I knew if I turned my back too soon, I'd regret it. I forced a polite laugh and said I had jumper cables in the trunk, hoping to sound casual while I calculated my next move. The man nodded quickly, too quickly, and glanced toward the crouched figure as if waiting for a signal. My headlights cast long shadows over the road, and I realized how far we were from anything. No houses, no distant glow from gas stations, just black trees hemming us in. I popped the trunk halfway, pretending to dig around while keeping one eye on them. That's when the crouched person stood up. They were taller than I expected, wearing a hood pulled tight, and for a second, they froze in the glare, deciding what to do. Something about the stillness broke me out of whatever hesitation I had left. I slammed the trunk shut, jumped back into the driver's seat and hit the locks. The first guy shouted something, not words I recognized, more like a bark, and both of them started running toward the car. My tires spun on the shoulder gravel before catching the asphalt. The hazard lights shrank fast in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I thought that was it. But then, in the red glow of my taillights, I caught movement again. Their car's headlights flared to life. They weren't stranded at all. My chest felt like it was pulsing with the rhythm of the road as I pushed the accelerator harder than I ever had. The sedan's lights grew larger behind me, closing the distance. Every curve of the highway felt like a gamble. One wrong turn and I'd be in a ditch. I couldn't call anyone. My phone had no signal for miles. The only thing I could think to do was keep driving until I found a sign of life. Then, through the windshield, I spotted a green highway marker flashing by. Exit 114, 5 miles. I didn't even know what town it led to, but it was my only shot. The other car pulled closer, high beams flaring through my mirrors. They swerved left, then right, trying to line up beside me. I kept my steering wheel locked straight, praying the road wouldn't curve again. Finally, I saw a cluster of yellow streetlights ahead, the faint outline of a gas station and a diner. I cut across the lane, barely keeping control, and took the exit ramp at nearly 70. My car fishtailed but stayed upright. Behind me, the sedan missed the turn, flying past the exit and disappearing down the highway. I coasted into the gas station lot and parked beneath the brightest light I could find. For a minute, I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers hurt. The gas station looked half abandoned, one of those places that stayed open 24 hours only on paper. A flickering sign buzzed overhead, and a single car was parked by the convenience store entrance, an old blue pickup, empty inside. I stepped out, scanning the road behind me. Nothing but the faint hum of engines somewhere far off. My heart was still hammering, but the silence felt heavier than the chase itself. I walked inside, trying to explain what happened to the sleepy cashier who looked barely out of high school. He blinked at me like he wasn't sure if I was serious until I pointed outside toward the highway. He picked up the phone right away and called the county sheriff. While we waited, I caught my reflection in the glass cooler door. I looked pale, older somehow, like the night had taken something from me. When the deputy arrived, I told him everything, every detail I could remember. The fake breakdown, the crouched figure, the moment their headlights came on. He nodded slowly, jotting things down on a small notepad, then told me something that made my stomach knot all over again. Apparently, there had been 3 similar reports that week. People pulled over to help stranded drivers along that same stretch of highway, and at least one car had been stolen. The deputy offered to follow me to the next town so I could rest at a motel. I agreed without thinking twice. The drive there felt longer than it should have. Every pair of headlights I saw in the rearview mirror made my pulse spike again. Even inside the motel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept the blinds half open, the TV volume low and the keys right by my hand. When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamt of flashing hazard lights pulsing in the dark, always getting closer, never stopping. It's been a few years now, and I still avoid driving at night whenever I can. Every Thanksgiving since then, my family jokes about how I finally learned to slow down, but they don't know the reason why. Sometimes when I'm on an empty road and see lights in the distance, my foot hesitates before pressing the gas. I think about that man, the one who waved me down, and the figure behind his car waiting for me to stop. Maybe they moved on to another highway. Maybe they were caught. Maybe they're still out there waiting for someone else to be kind enough to pull over. I work as a mechanic in a small town about an hour outside Louisville, and that Thanksgiving was supposed to be one of the few calm days I'd get all year. My sister Lily had come down with her husband and their 2 boys, and my mom insisted we have dinner at my house since I'd just remodeled the kitchen. It was one of those cold, gray afternoons where the sky never really brightens, just sits heavy and pale above the rooftops. I remember thinking how nice it felt to finally have everyone together in one place, the sound of football in the background, the smell of stuffing, and Lily fussing about how I'd cut the bread too thick. Around 5, I started carving the turkey. It had been in the oven since noon, golden and perfect. The kitchen light flickered once, just a quick blink, but it was enough to make my mom joke about ghosts in the new wiring. I laughed it off and kept slicing. Then it flickered again, harder this time, the bulbs dimming until the room felt tinted blue for a second before returning to normal. My nephew Mason giggled and said the house looked like a horror movie. I didn't think much of it, but I remember glancing toward the window and noticing how still everything outside was, like the wind had stopped all at once. A minute later, the smell changed. At first it was subtle, just a hint of something acrid cutting through the usual warmth of roasted meat and butter. Then the smoke alarm chirped once and went silent again, even though the air was visibly hazing up. I turned to check the oven, and that's when I saw the smoke seeping out from the edges of the door, thick and gray like it had a mind of its own. Lily shouted, "Hey, something's burning!" I figured some grease had splashed over the pan, nothing serious, so I grabbed the mitts and pulled the handle. The second the oven door opened, a column of fire burst out like a living thing. It wasn't a normal flare-up. This was violent, explosive, the kind that roars with a sound you can feel in your chest. I stumbled backward, the mitts already smoking. My mom screamed for everyone to get out, and Mason started crying. I tried to reach the knob on the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Not even a click. I yanked it again, harder, but it was jammed tight like someone had glued it shut. Behind me, the fire spread along the wall, and I realized this wasn't just grease. Something had been waiting to ignite. I ran to the sink, filled a pot with water, and threw it at the base of the flames. It hissed but did almost nothing. The fire just climbed higher, feeding off something invisible. The air had a chemical tang now, sharp enough to sting my eyes and throat. Lily was trying to break a window with a chair, but the glass only cracked, refusing to give. My mom was on the phone with 911, shouting our address, but even her voice sounded small under the roar. The kitchen ceiling had started to blacken, flakes of soot floating down like burnt snow. I kept thinking, this can't be happening, not here, not in my house. Then I noticed the smell coming from behind the stove. It was different, almost sweet, like gasoline mixed with plastic. I leaned closer through the heat shimmer and saw the faint outline of something wet pooled along the baseboard. Someone had poured accelerant there, and it had soaked into the wood. My first thought was pure disbelief. Nobody but me had been home all morning. I remember locking the door after taking the trash out. The idea that someone had been inside while I was working in the garage made my chest tighten, in a way no smoke ever could. Lily finally smashed a side window using the fire poker. She cut her hand in the process, but we started passing people through. First the kids, then my mom. The air outside was freezing and looked gray from the smoke pouring out. I was the last one still in the kitchen, trying to grab the fire extinguisher from under the counter. When I pulled the pin and sprayed, the foam sputtered halfway, then died completely. The gauge was in the red. It was like everything that could fail that night had decided to do it at once. I dropped it, realizing I had about 30 seconds before the cabinets went up too. I ducked through the broken window and hit the cold ground hard. Behind me, the curtains caught, and the living room turned orange. My neighbors started running across the street with blankets and buckets, but the flames were already eating through the roof. I remember standing there, barefoot in the frost, watching years of my life turn into a single column of smoke. The fire truck sirens echoed somewhere far away, but it felt like the whole world had slowed down, stretching each sound into something distorted and unreal. By the time the firefighters arrived, half the house was gone. They kept shouting at me to move back, but I couldn't make my legs work. I just stood there staring at the spot behind the stove, where I knew that slick puddle had been. One of the officers later told me the accelerant had soaked deep enough to act like a hidden fuse. Whoever did it must have poured it hours before and waited for the right moment. The oven heat must have triggered it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Who would do something like that, and why me? The next morning, I walked through what was left after the fire crews cleared the site. The air smelled like wet ash and melted metal. In the kitchen, the walls were gone, and you could see straight through the studs to what used to be the dining room. But the strangest part wasn't the damage. It was the thing they found behind the stove. An empty metal canister, scorched black, wedged tight between the pipes. The fire chief said it looked like it had been placed deliberately. It wasn't something that could have just rolled there on its own. The police asked if anyone had keys to my house, and I gave them the short list: Lily, my mom, and my ex-girlfriend Rachel. I hadn't spoken to Rachel in months, not since things ended badly over some money she'd borrowed and never paid back. When they called her, she swore she hadn't been near my place, and I wanted to believe her. But there was something about the way the canister was hidden. Like the person knew the house well enough to plan it quietly, methodically. That thought stayed with me long after the investigation stalled. It's been 2 years now. The official report lists the cause as intentional arson by an unknown individual. Insurance helped me rebuild part of the house, but I sold it right after. I couldn't stay there. Not after knowing someone had walked through my kitchen, poured fuel behind my stove, and left me and my family to burn. Every Thanksgiving since then, I cook somewhere else, usually with friends. I don't even keep an oven at home anymore. Just a microwave, and a habit of checking every lock twice before I go to sleep.